Welcome to Fasken's 16th annual PDAC mining seminar series. My name is Michael Barassa and I'm with the Global Mining Group in the Toronto office. Today's webinar, ReMining for the Future, Reimagining Mining. This is the second in our series of 12 seminars this year. A link to all of Fasken's PDAC events can be found underneath the video window. As you view the info slide on the screen, I'd like to provide a land acknowledgement. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have been present in Canada for thousands of years. These Indigenous peoples have a profound and ongoing attachment to this territory. At Fasken, we recognize that we have a role to play in the ongoing process of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, here and elsewhere in Canada. We have embarked on the reconciliation journey by adopting a plan with the overall purpose of contributing meaningfully to reconciliation. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Amy Carruthers from our Vancouver office to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Michael. I have the privilege today to introduce our friends from Regeneration as our panel speakers. First, we have Dr. Ayesha Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed is the Director of Site Evaluations and Project Advancement at Regeneration, where she leads opportunity identification and guides projects that transform mining waste into restorative value. She brings 15 years of global experience in geoscience and applied geochemistry. Before joining Regeneration, she served as Manager of Geoscience at Teck Resources, leading multidisciplinary teams across Canada, the US, Chile, and Peru. She holds a bachelor's and master's of science from UBC, a PhD from the University of Tasmania, and is a published researcher, seasoned technical speaker, and active contributor to the geoscience community. Please welcome Dr. Ayesha Ahmed. And we also have Stephen Desposito. Stephen is the founder, president, and CEO of Regeneration, a B Corp redefining how critical and precious minerals are supplied through remining, reprocessing, and ecological restoration to deliver minerals that benefit both biodiversity and local communities. He is also the president and CEO of Resolve, an international NGO that partners with industry, governments, and civil society to create lasting solutions to complex environmental and social challenges. With a career spanning policy, systems design, and enterprise innovation, Stephen works with partners to rethink how industry can create social, environment, and economic value. His past roles include leading Earthworks, chairing the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on the Future of Mining and Metals, and senior leadership at Greenpeace International. He continues to serve on multiple sustainability and technology advisory boards, and earlier in his career helped launch grassroots recycling initiatives in Washington, D.C., contributing to the city's first recycling legislation. Please welcome Stephen Desposito. And now, Stephen, over to you to continue with your presentation.
Thank you. I love the title of the session, Reimagining Mining. I mean, it's essential that we do, because we need to engage not just communities and their minds and ourselves in this reimagining, but the general public. So I'd actually like to open with an effort we've made to engage outside of our circles by putting together a video that tells our story in just a minute or so. So I'd like to start by sharing that video.
Once upon a time, there was the before. Before was pristine, biodiverse. Before was full of promise. Now, too often, there's just the after. After the minerals were extracted. After the earth was disturbed or degraded. After was too often how the story ended. But before refused to die. Before lived on in the minds of those who had known the earth in its original splendor, who asked, what if we could move forward by going back? So that after wasn't the end of the story, but just a chapter along the way. Regeneration remines and extracts metals from waste to transform legacy sites into ecological assets, producing minerals for sustainable brands and the green energy transition. to help fund habitat restoration. Working with our partners will renew biodiversity, including forests, streams, and wetlands, and help return the Earth closer to how it was before. Regeneration. Begin again.
We all know that when we visit communities that have been affected by mining, and there have been problems from mining legacies, the question we get asked is, if we want to develop a new mine, a new opportunity, what are we going to do about past impacts, negative impacts of mining? And that's whether or not that typically wasn't the problem that your company, that my company created, but it's an essential question for the industry together to ask and answer. And so Regeneration really is a company, public benefit company set up to fill that gap, right? We all know that the size of the prize, there's a lot of metals left in mine waste. The trick is how to get it out. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, and we'll talk about it from different perspectives. One of the most important of those perspectives is that community view of, who is a trusted partner when there have been these negative impacts in the past to come in and rethink this opportunity. So that's where, as Ayesha will talk about, ReMining is not new. Restoration is not new. Engaging successfully with communities is not new to the mining industry. Putting these things together to go back into these legacy communities, these impacted communities, is what's new. Next slide, Ayesha. Why now, right? Well, one of the reasons that's industry important to why now is the growing environmental liability balance sheets across the sector. It's in our interests to improve, if mining is to play and will play a critical role in our energy future and in our sustainability future, those balance sheets need to clean up and improve. And that's whether the slide talks about the liability hangover in major mining companies, current and projected. But the same thing is true. It's the same problem in a community. There's a legacy hangover and there's a liability, and the same is true where governments hold liabilities. But there's a little bit more going on than just that liability dimension, right? There's opportunity, there's potential for job creation in rural communities, which is politically very important to advance economic development. There's recasting the image of the mining industry in an effective way, credible way, so that mining companies are invited in. It's increasingly happening, but we need to address this historical legacy. There's new technology, right? The new tech can be applied to these sites in ways that really unlocks value and lowers impact. But it's a lot of that technology, as Ayesha will talk about, is stranded. It's having a hard time getting to sites because these sites are deemed liabilities. So it's hard for an innovator with a new water process treatment technology or a new mine processing technology to get access to material. We have to unlock that blockage, and we have to close that gap. These locations are community and biodiversity and nature assets. We have potential to unlock these assets to help fulfill our goals, our nature positive goals, our 30 by 30 goals. What's really driving this fundamentally the why now, higher metals prices are changing the game. We'll talk about some of our projects. They're both gold and they're critical minerals. Interestingly, gold is helping us unlock critical minerals at sites, and Ayesha will talk about that. But the new price points are essential. So is the geopolitics of mining, which you all know as well as we do. That accelerant is really making now the moment for this kind of innovation. Next slide, Ayesha. We set up our company in a fairly unique way because our idea was that if we're going to unlock the value proposition in these impacted legacy sites, it's really a value chain opportunity to work together. And getting back to the storytelling in that video, we have an opportunity to connect the consumers and the public to the products that use the metals, not in ways that are, the industry just kind of talking on its own, but using our partnerships with downstream companies and with civil society to bring the story alive, and with communities to bring the story alive. So we were very intentional in terms of who we are about partnering with a mining major like Rio Tinto, who took a bet on us early days when we started about 4 years ago, and Apple, who we've been working with to address legacy impacts in placer mining communities, and Missouri, a Canadian jewelry company, startup, really well positioned with millennials. I don't know about you, but everybody I know who's they're in their 30s or younger knows about Missouri, at least if they're wearing jewelry, they tend to. And so that's a really good target for us, because that's the generation. Those are the generations who pay careful attention to things like this. And then we're also backed by an NGO I help lead, which is Resolve. So we bring this unique combination into the community, into the boardroom, and we think that's essential to unlocking value. Those are our public partners. There's some other folks we're working with at sites and to innovate. You see them here. All of them want to be part of this. They want to help. They want to kind of put their oar in the water, and we really appreciate not just that they're doing this as a commercial partner of ours, which they in many cases are, but they're going the extra mile to really help us think this through. Next. What are we after? Our products, better habitat, communities that see a future for that land parcel and a better future for themselves because they can protect it, turn it into a conservation area, redevelop it. That's the sell. That's the thing that is attractive. The target commodities are a means to an end, but they're also our revenue. The company exists because of the revenue that we're producing and will produce from these target commodities. So using the Canadian maple leaf, we've repurposed an image that somebody else created to show you what we're targeting, right? Essentially, we're targeting everything. But in the need to make choices and to look at the best opportunities, you get a sense of where we're focused. Really, copper is a leader for us, as Dr. Ahmed will talk about. Copper is really important, cobalt, manganese, others. What we're finding really interestingly, although gold and silver are not deemed critical as for USGS or for the in governments like Canada and Australia, they are critical to the communities where there's past mine waste and past mine impact. And they're also critical because we're finding that in a number of our projects, it's hard to get cobalt out on its own, but if it's in there with gold, then you can use the value of the gold to unlock the whole project. And in our way of looking at a full value mining approach, which is one of my favorite phrases in the mining industry, full value mining, if you're going to get the gold out, even if the cobalt is a break-even proposition, we're getting it out. Our objective is to get everything we can out of that tailings, or the wastewater or the waste rock. Next. Dr. Ahmed is going to dive deeply into the two critical pieces of our core business. I mean, the industry, the first life cycle of these sites is the story of the mining industry. And there's great success stories and some not as great examples of what's happened in the past. We get to work in, we're the not great is our target, right? And so we go after that, whether it's held by industry as a liability or an orphan site, held by a major or mid-sized company in their closure portfolio, or there's waste at an active site. Those are our best targets. Both of those are in our sweet spot. We're looking in our business model at two points of emphasis. One is what we call the second life cycle. Let's put the minerals to work to pay for the operation. So the value in the ground in the waste turns into the way to get the site remedy, the remining occurring and the metals recovery occurring. But then there's this third life cycle, which is what are we doing with the property once that's complete and in the process of the remining and recovery? Well, nature positive development, conservation, habitat improvement, economic development, solar, renewables, data centers, it's all in scope. It's really, as you know, it's a community conversation and engagement. Next. Technology, I mentioned it earlier. We find there's a large universe of new technologies on offer to the mining industry. The challenge is to move them from TRL 1 or 2 or 3 into something that's actually commercially viable. So we've invested some time and money into assessing the universe, trying to know everything that's out there as much as that's humanly or possible on the part of our company. And we've got a growing partner network. And really part of our secret sauce is to find proven and some innovative tech and put it together into a flow sheet that works. And you'll see on this slide that a number of the companies, the innovators, leading innovators that we're working with are Canadian. I think, I look at the mining sector, the mining industry and the professionals in it and the creativity and leadership that have come from Canada as a major asset, both domestically, but globally. It's a great export. I'd love to think of repurposing all mine sites and the technology that's needed for it and the strategic creativity and business innovation as a next great export and offer from the Canadian mining sector to the world. That's how I look at it. When we'll talk a little bit about the traction we're getting in Canada in particular, but we're really pleased to be working in Canada and work with provincial and federal and territorial governments because we actually see the Canadian mining industry and its governments as leaders in this space. But it gives us a bit of a first mover advantage. The investment we made is something we can bring to mining majors, to mid-sized companies, and to governments and say, we have a good sense of this space and we know how to deploy this effectively so that we can get the metals out safely, cleanly, and build community confidence. Next. I mentioned partnerships. I mentioned Canada. You can see just on this visual representation, these are some of the examples of how we're working and what we're doing. But we're really pleased that the progress we're making in Canada. And also we're focused initially on the North America and Australia, and we're making good progress in other parts of the world too. And we're global, but we had to pick a few places to really kind of put our oar in the water and get moving. And then, before turning over to Ayesha, this is our map of all the sites that she's spending a lot of time trying to prioritize and doing so quite effectively. I just want to say one more thing. In addition to thanking you for having me on this call and participating in this really important discussion, I just want to flag the importance of policy innovation. I want to just touch on it for a second because government's participating, and I think it's going to be key to unlocking the value. We have to think creatively. It's hard to think about that in a regulatory context. It's hard to be creative and a regulator at the same time, but it can be done. We're seeing examples of it, and I just want to encourage it. And whether that's like a major policy reform, like in the U.S., the Good Samaritan Act, which has its strengths and weaknesses, frankly, or it's government just looking at ways to think differently about how you recover metals with the purpose of trying to actually reclaim a site. It's a little different than a mine, right? I think there's real opportunities for kind of thinking differently from a policy regulatory point of view. And so I just want to encourage that too. Happy to go into that in the Q&A, but I wanted to put a pin in that because it's so critically important. And we've invested a lot of time and effort and resource into being able not just to understand the policy landscape, but to influence it. But with that, I'm really happy to be here, and I'll pass the torch to, although that's more appropriate for the Summer Olympics. I don't know what I would pass here, maybe I don't know, hockey puck, hockey stick over to
We're not talking about hockey stick.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to mention that, right?
No.
Okay, over to you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. So Steve's really laid out Regeneration's vision and business model, the big picture, some of the challenges and opportunities in this ReMining space. But I know that as part of this webinar, you were promised details and case studies. So that's what I'll do in the coming slides. I'll take some of these dots that you see on the map and turn them a bit more into a comprehensive story. But first, I really want to make sure that we're all aligned on terminology. So it's important to clarify what we mean exactly by mine waste, because it's not a single material. In hard rock, precious, and base metal mining, material is typically extracted from an open pit or an underground mine, and it's classified as ore or waste. Waste rock, which is typically very low grade or barren material, it's sent to a waste dump. You've probably seen these very large structures when you're driving along the highway or in the rural country. This is our first waste stream of interest, the waste rock. Ore is then sent to the mill or it's stockpiled for future processing. And during that comminution and extraction process, ore is processed into two products. So first, a concentrate, which is that upgraded form of the economic minerals of interest. And then the second is tailings, which is kind of a slurry of uneconomic minerals, typically, and processed water. And this is our second major waste stream of interest. And that's because it often contains valuable metals and minerals that weren't captured during historic production. The concentrate then may be sold directly to a partner, downstream off-taker, or it's further refined through a process like smelting, which produces a purer product like we see on the right, but also a waste product like slag. So when we're talking about mine waste, we're referring to several distinct materials, each with their own reprocessing potential, their challenges, their opportunities, from wastewater right through to slag. As Steve mentioned, remining and reprocessing waste isn't new. There are several recent success stories globally, but what is new is Regeneration's model and approach to these sites. So reinvesting the profits from reprocessing directly into site remediation and applying innovative technologies to make these projects both economically and environmentally successful. So one example of reprocessing is the New Century operation in Queensland, Australia. The original Century mine, it was operated by MMG, a zinc, lead, silver deposit. It ran for about 15 years and then closed in 2016. In 2018, New Century Resources took over, eventually further taken over by Sibanye-Stillwater, and they restarted the site specifically to reprocess the large zinc tailings deposit. But this was an economic play. The goal here was not restoration or remediation, it was revenue. Their approach involves regrinding the tailings to a finer grain size, and what this actually does is it liberates the very fine zinc minerals, the sphalerite particles that remain locked up in surrounding minerals. So once that zinc mineral is liberated, the zinc can then be recovered through a conventional flotation circuit. So this shows us how just one small change in that processing flow sheet can unlock a significant amount of value. A second example that's ongoing now is Barrick's Golden Sunlight operation in Montana. So they had decades of conventional open pit mining and milling, but in 2022, they completed construction of a new processing facility that enables large-scale tailings reprocessing. So the operation now pumps this legacy tailings slurry to a dedicated tailings flotation plant. There's a rougher and cleaner stage, and a 35% sulfide concentrate is produced. So this concentrate essentially looks like pyrite or fool's gold that you've surely seen before. And this is sold to Barrick and Nevada gold mines for use in gold production as sulfuric acid. So removing the sulfur, it not only creates a valuable product that's sold downstream, but it of course also reduces a long-term source of potential acid generation and groundwater contamination. So the remaining sulfide-free tailings, the secondary tailings, those are filled into the pit to support reclamation. Looking across the Canadian reprocessing landscape, there are several projects ranging from early stage concepts to advanced pre-feasibility studies focused on reprocessing mine waste. But some, are purely driven by economics, while others aim to generate the revenue needed in order to reopen historic operations. So again, a bit of a different mandate than what Regeneration is proposing. Just starting on the left, Panther Metals has just collected a number of surface and auger samples from the Winston Tailings Project in Ontario. They're starting to see some promising results, 2% zinc, 22 parts per million silver, some cobalt. And this group in specific is hoping to use the revenue from this project to fund the historical in situ Winston zinc-lead resource. ES Gold's Montalban project in Quebec, more advanced. They've released a preliminary economic assessment around 1 million tons at 0.4 grams per ton, hoping to start production in 2026. And the last example on the right is the Hollinger Gold project in Ontario. And this, as far as I understand, is a purely economic-driven approach. So Stellar Resources has just released an economic assessment as well, nearly 40 tons at relatively low grade, 0.4 grams per ton. And I've highlighted this project in red because I believe it's the first project to receive a provincial permit to recover gold under the Recovery of Minerals permit in Ontario. And this makes the extraction of minerals by reprocessing an easier pathway than by conventional hard rock operations. So we've talked about the existing kind of global landscape of reprocessing, and now I'd like to shift to Regeneration's approach to site selection and project advancement, and then I'll provide 2 case studies from our portfolio. As Steve noted, there are millions of tons, billion tons of mine waste that contain critical metals and minerals of interest. There are 10,000 sites alone in Canada. No single company can take on all of them. I like to think that Regeneration can do a lot, but we can't do all that. So we've developed a structured, a disciplined framework to identify, to prioritize, and to advance the projects that have the greatest technical, economic, and environmental potential. So we approach project and site selection through a number of different lenses. And this is really where the Regeneration business model differs from a lot of traditional exploration or mining companies. So starting on the left, the evaluation process often starts, not always, but often starts with the economics. Is there sufficient grade and sufficient tonnage to make it viable and to support the restoration that is envisioned? Can we extract, not just are the metals and minerals there, but is there a viable pathway to extraction? And does the revenue justify the capital? But in addition to economics, we also ask, can the land recover? We look at biodiversity, contamination levels, water availability, to understand the ecological and the restoration opportunity. Community outcomes are central. We prioritize sites that address legacy concerns, that create jobs and build long-term capacity, especially where indigenous and local land values are involved. Strong partnerships are essential. They can determine whether a project succeeds or stalls. We look for willing upstream partners, local and indigenous communities, government, mining companies, but we also look downstream at our offtake partners for the products that we produce. We consider how emerging technologies, and Steve mentioned this, how they can transform a site and unlock value. We look at that transformational opportunity, not just in the reprocessing, but from waste characterization right through to restoration modeling. And finally, we look at how this project fits in or even helps to shape the regulatory landscape. So it's really about finding sites where the environmental, the social, and the economic value align. Once a site is selected and its value proposition is defined, we advance it through a phased evaluation framework. We begin, and I would like you really here to focus on, not on the detail, but on the high level. So we start at a concept phase, we move it through to scoping, feasibility, into construction and operation, and eventually land stewardship. And at each one of these stages, we are collecting more data, we are de-risking the project, we're evaluating the revenue potential as well as the restoration potential, and we're working with our partners and our collaborators throughout the process. Earlier, I highlighted the importance of new technologies in reprocessing and in our evaluation framework. It's important here, I emphasize, and Steve mentioned this as well, that regeneration is technology agnostic. So we're not tied to one specific leaching chemistry, flotation design, or processing method. And this really opens up the technology landscape for us. Over the past 3 years, we've built a comprehensive portfolio of technologies that really address every stage of the reprocessing value chain, from in situ characterization of waste streams to remining and reprocessing to remediation, restoration, and ultimately waste reduction. In our opinion, the key to success of these projects is not relying on one technology at one step, but really optimizing each stage to capture incremental value across the entire mining value chain. And in an upcoming case study, I'll walk through some of these specific technologies we're deploying. All right, so we've reviewed the components of a good project and Regeneration's approach to developing those projects. And now I'd like to walk you through 2 case studies that are in our portfolio. And the first is the salmon gold model applied to the Sulphur Creek site in Yukon. The Sulphur Creek site, it lies within the Indian River watershed. It's about 60 kilometers southeast of Dawson City in Yukon. And the area has seen more than a century of placer gold mining, from hand mining in the late 1800s to dredging in the mid 1900s, and then into the modern means of more mechanical methods. These activities, especially the drilling, have severely impacted local waterways. And this has led to the loss of habitat, reduced ecological diversity, and particular to the name of this project, the disappearance of salmon spawning in the system. So the salmon gold model, which is used here at Sulphur Creek and also several other sites across BC, Yukon, and Alaska, it follows a pretty simple structure. Legacy placer sites are identified, like the ones that you see on the left. And then Regeneration and Resolve partners with the local operators to mechanically recover gold from previously dredged areas. The site and stream restoration occurs ideally concurrently with that remining and reprocessing project. And the gold is then recovered and refined offsite and sold as responsibly sourced materials to companies such as Apple and Majuri. As Steve mentioned, Majuri, it's a Canadian jewelry company, and they even offer a dedicated salmon gold line of rings and earrings that are made exclusively from the gold produced through this program. And I would be remiss to point out that I am wearing these earrings today, so a little bit of a plug for them. And this is really the outcome that we are working toward. On the left is Sulphur Creek before restoration, showing the severe impacts of historic dredging. On the right is the post-restoration landscape. And hopefully I have the figures here correct, but within 24 hours of reopening the rehabilitated stream channel, there were fish already observed returning. The second case study is from our flagship project, the Headley Mariposa Flats Sites project in southeastern BC. This is a gold and cobalt site located just about 3 hours east of Vancouver on the traditional unceded territory of the Similkameen people. And we're in the feasibility validation stage of this project. What I want to show you here is this is the actual site And I don't think you can see my mouse, so I'll just describe. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a water body. That's the Similkameen River. And then you can see a road, that's Highway 3, a pretty major road going through Hedley. And in between those two, the road and the river, is one of the Hedley tailing sites. So you can imagine the challenge that this tailing site poses, both for potential contamination of the river, as well as exposed tailings within a populated area. The project has a long legacy that started with gold discovery in the area in the late 1800s. Historic mining operations left behind tailings from a number of different mines in the area that were then placed into 3 locations: the old tailings, new tailings, and then what's called the heap leach tailings. So actually in the 1980s, there was reprocessing attempted at this site, but they used the wrong chemicals for leaching, and they actually left a bigger mess than when they started. So it's no surprise that the First Nations within this area had a lot of hesitation at the idea of engaging in any kind of mining or reprocessing activities again. In 2024, this site was returned to the British Columbia Abandoned Mines Group, and it's really when this transition happened that Resolve and Regeneration were first engaged, along with the Upper Similkameen Indian Band, to really define what the future of this site was going to be. So the approach to Hedley, currently the BC government holds about a $35 million liability for this site and has annual monitoring costs around $1 million. We have community concerns, the Upper Similkameen Indian Band sharing concerns about groundwater contamination and dust. So the business case here is really clear. We want to transform that $35 million liability into a profitable operation recovering $150 million potentially of gold and cobalt while delivering environmental remediation and community benefits. So our solution here is to work directly with the BC government, but to coordinate with the Upper Similkameen Indian Band to undertake this feasibility study that we're currently in. If it hasn't been clear already, I really just want to take a moment to highlight how important the collaboration has been from the very start of this project. So before the project officially began last year, we had the BC government, these are our official partners, representatives of the Upper Similkameen Indian Band, Regeneration was there. We even had our engineering partners at this very early stage, all in the same room working to align on that shared vision. Throughout characterization and feasibility, we've continued to work really closely with all parties to ensure that the needs are addressed and understood. This early stage of coordination, it really set the tone. So since then, and what you can see on the right is there's been ongoing engagement, joint field visits, what's seen here. The Upper Similkameen Band has come to site to be part of the drilling process, really to maintain trust and keep everyone involved. In March of last year, we completed a 22-hole drill program across those 3 tailing sites that you saw. And we also installed new environmental monitoring wells for environmental baseline testing. We then sent the drill core samples for a full suite of testing. I won't bore you with what that is, but that's my bread and butter: geochemistry, environmental testing, mineralogy, metallurgy, and to collect material to undertake technology trials. And I really can't emphasize how important this work is. It's not just to confirm the presence of gold and cobalt, but also to understand how these and other elements like arsenic, which might be contaminants or might be recovered metals, how they occur in what minerals, in what particle size, how we extract them. So to give a sense of scale of these projects, the initial drill program took about 2 weeks in the field, but the whole program took about 3 months to plan and about $400,000 Canadian to execute. The follow-on test work, including working with our metallurgical test partners and the remediation planning, it took another 6 to 12 months and $750,000. So I'm putting these timelines and these numbers here because it's a reminder that meaningful site evaluation, it takes time, it takes resources and upfront investment well before a project is confirmed as feasible. So using all that information that we collected as part of the drill program, those assays, some geophysical data, we use those to delineate the tailings facilities, to estimate 3D volumes and the grades within those volumes. So very similar to an early exploration and mining project. I must stress that these are non-compliant contained metal estimates, but we're looking at around 1.5 million tons at nearly a gram per ton gold and a few hundred parts per million cobalt. As part of the Headley tailings characterization programs, we looked at really high resolution images of the minerals in these tailings samples. And the devil really is in the details when it comes to reprocessing. So over time, some tailings can naturally cement into these aggregates like you see on the screen, where clay and iron compounds bind together during the aging and the compaction process. So these aggregates, which are just a few millimeters across, they contain really fine mineral grains. Most of them are uneconomic, but embedded within those aggregates are the sulfides, which are those visible bright white spots that you can see. They hold all the value in the project, and they also hold the contaminants. So because these sulfides are all locked up in these clumps, conventional processing and separation methods like flotation or gravity won't recover them. And that's why we need innovative technologies to unlock and extract our target elements efficiently. So now we get into some examples of this technology implementation. At Headley and during the drill program, we tested Iberia's downhole X-ray fluorescence tool during drilling. This provided us real-time geochemical data. It helped us to guide sampling, to improve geological modeling. And the idea here is really to reduce the time between that first drill program and production. To address the challenge of liberating those valuable minerals trapped in those particles that I just spoke about in the earlier slide, we've partnered with DISA Technologies. So they have a chemical fleet-free slurry abrasion system, and it uses really high-powered water jets to break apart these aggregates through particle-on-particle collision. So it's like a cleaning and pretreatment process. Further downstream in the process, we're exploring modular, scalable equipment tailored to the dynamic nature of reprocessing sites. And these systems really help to reduce the upfront capital costs that are required. They have a compact footprint, and so they can be easily dismantled and moved between projects. All this work has led to the development of this pre-feasibility flow sheet, which will continue to optimize as we've moved through the feasibility process that we're currently in. So just starting in the top left, I'll try to give this a very brief and high-level summary. So tailings are excavated and they're delivered to a repulp sump via a mobile feed hopper. They're then pushed through that high-pressure slurry ablation system that I just spoke about to clean and disaggregate the material. That treated slurry is then passed through a gravity circuit to recover any free gold and heavy minerals. That material is then sent through, the remaining material sent through to a tank leach system. And what's really interesting here is we've run a number of recent trials with innovative non-cyanide leaching alternatives, and we have achieved gold recoveries exceeding conventional methods. And this really strengthens the project's social license when we're not considering the use of cyanide. The resulting leach solution, which is enriched in gold and cobalt, it's then processed through a conventional solvent extraction and electrowinning circuit, and the refined products are sent to our downstream off-takers. On the bottom, you can see that our secondary tailings that we produce, because we do produce tailings in addition to concentrate, but they're now non-acid generating. They're generally inert. And we filter them to produce a near dry stackable cake. And this material is then hauled to a different part of the site where it can be engineered into stable landforms that support long-term restoration and that communities and land use vision. So in this flow sheet, it's really the steps of particle disaggregation, enhanced gravity recovery, and these leaching alternatives that are delivering the biggest upside to conventional processing flow sheets. At Headley, our restoration strategy is really progressive. So our plan is to begin at the French mill site, which you can see on the left with some of those historic buildings. So we'll remove contaminated soil, some of the infrastructure, waste rock, and tailings from that site before moving to the heap leach tailings and some of the surrounding tailings. As the material is relocated, that's our opportunity to recover the metals. We remove the sulfides, we stabilize the waste geochemically while extracting gold and cobalt to help fund the restoration beyond, and that's very important here, beyond basic reclamation and what's required from legislation. And on the right is really the culmination of this entire process. It's a renewed landscape that can be enjoyed by the local community and the broader ecosystem. So Steve, I'll just pass back to you now for some final thoughts before opening it up to the Q&A. And you just want to unmute.
Thank you. Thanks, Ayesha. I think I'll just close with this. If you think about what an NGO working together with downstream partners, working together with really kind of visionary and excited experts in the industry, with incumbent majors like Rio Tinto, one of our partners, and others, we're working with another handful of major mining companies at their active sites and sites near their projects, and regulators. Like, you know, what we're doing really together, we're unlocking the value that's been stranded in these sites. But we're also doing, if you think about the need for metals, for the mining industry to accelerate production of metals, critical minerals and others, we've got to accelerate, improve social license at the same rate or better. That's, to me, when I see the industry's challenge, to me that sits at the center of it, because metals have to be put into a different context, given how essential they are. It's almost, I wish we were calling them essential metals, not critical metals, actually. But so this is of all the things that one could work on in the world, from where I come from my NGO background, from industry leaders that I know, to me, this is the essential challenge and project that we can put our oar in the water and really make a difference on. So we're glad to have the opportunity from Fasken to share this with you. And we welcome not only your questions, but your ideas and your challenges. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. There's just so much innovation and information there for our audience to consider, and very inspiring work that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. Just to open things off while we wait to see if we have any questions coming in from others here, I thought it would be helpful to dive a bit deeper into the role that technology and innovation plays, as that's something you both focused on a fair bit. And I'm wondering, just hearing some of your comments, if you see parallels with the oil and gas industry and the massive production that was enabled by the fracking revolution to produce resources that were previously thought uneconomic. Is this a similar opportunity we have here, in your view?
I guess the question is, who's the George Mitchell of the ReMining restoration space, right? I think for us, and Ayesha, I'd like you to add to this, but our role, so the answer is I hope so. But I think to Ayesha's point earlier, I don't think it's going to be like, I mean, the fracking revolution was really two things, right? Plus determination and drive and never giving up, which is the third thing. But but it's both the fracking itself and then the horizontal drilling, right? And so that just to me is symbolic of the combinations needed. I don't think we have a magic bullet. I'd like to do a plug for DISA, whom Ayesha mentioned, because that technology that like unlocks, you described it better, you're the technology expert. But to me, that's the kind of thing that where we see value, you can use something at multiple sites. Like some things are just for gold, some things can be seen at multiple sites. So I think the winners in this, there are going to be a lot of winners. I'm not sure it'll be as like monolithic as the fracking and the hydraulic fracturing plus the horizontal drilling. It'll be a dozen or two things, is my guess, that are the breakthroughs. And I think DISA is in one of the. I'd place a bet there if I was placing a bet. Not that I am. We're placing a bet by partnering with them. But what would you add to that, Ayesha?
Yeah, I think 2 points. Everything you say, agree with. Coming from the mining industry and a pretty conventional as an exploration geologist, we know that the mining industry is generally, I'll try to be as diplomatic as possible, but slow to adopt new technologies and slow to change. And it's been interesting to see the oil and gas industry running in parallel to us, and the mining industry does sometimes seem a little bit behind. Some of that, I think, is just to do with the amount of money and capital available to fund these technology projects. When you look at oil and gas, they're often drilling, 3 or 4 kilometer holes. And so every single bit of technology, you need to put everything into that one hole to define your reservoir. Whereas in mining and in tailings reprocessing, we really have a lot more information to work with. But I do think it's a really interesting time looking at the government supporting this technology initiative. So in Canada, we have the MICA network, which is a network that introduces mining industry partners to technology, like really new low technology readiness level companies. And I think we need more of these kinds of institutions that really help to pair the technologies with the companies in order to get a lot of the technology from the bench scale into the field and doing the kind of test bed pilot plant level work.
Just can I add one quick thing, which is I think we're certainly willing and have set ourselves up to be, very much like this. What we learn is kind of open source. So like, I think it's really important for a posture in the industry to do that, because we're going to need to learn what does and doesn't work at these sites. I think that's critically important.
Thank you. On the point about policy and regulatory support to facilitate and help unlock some of these opportunities, can you comment on how our current regulatory frameworks are they well suited to ReMining? And can you tell us a bit more about what needs to change or what is changing in order to help make these opportunities more appealing for folks?
Sure. I mean, that's a whole another conversation we should have like 90 minutes on, Amy, as you well know as well as I do. But I will say a few things. I'll say that that if we can identify, we've done a lot of studying of these sites, as you've seen on the map. There are places at those sites and at each of these sites, the site itself or a chunk of, to use a non-technical term, a chunk of the site, are relatively better suited than other places to test things out, right? And so an idea of using data sets that government has, that we have, the analysis that we've done, to find the best places to do technology test beds is a really smart idea. But it doesn't just happen, right? It needs government backing. It needs to kind of have the right innovative mindset. So you actually incentivize innovators, and we have to deal with the issue of liability. Like you go into a site, it's very challenging. If you finance the site, it's one thing if you're just doing the testing, but if you're actually going to run a site and even to bring test equipment there or test the material, you don't want to own all the past liability. There are good reasons we have past statutes that address past liability, because this stuff is environmentally and harmful, and it can be a public health issue. So there's not suggesting we don't take that seriously. We absolutely need to, but we need ways to open up the space, right, so that you can get your hands on the material and take the technology out of the lab. I think that's essential. I also think if you look at the overall math, right? We need these metals from somewhere, these minerals from somewhere. And so the idea of retuning regulatory and policy approaches to actually incentivize brownfield sites. I mean, think about the brownfields. Like I'm learning about Canadian policy. I'm more familiar with US, but brownfields, old manufacturing sites, that got off to a bit of a rocky start, but it was a smashing success politically. You should have a brownfields program for old, rural sites, right? And let's pick some winners and go out and show what's possible. It's really hard to change policy in the abstract. It's easier to do it with a little bit of example. So I think that's the key. I really appreciate what we're working on with the BC government right now at Headley, because we're going to create an example. And once you have the example, then you can say, well, here's what worked. And you can start to look to other provinces, to other territories, federal government, and say, let's work, within existing authority, just maybe looking a little differently. Fundamental question, and I'll just close with this on this question, Amy, is are we regulating mines? Or are we regulating cleanup projects? That's a different paradigm, right? There's metals there and there's materials, but it's not it's a little different in a lot of situations than a mine. And so that's another, I think, taking a new lens. I was in a meeting here in DC a few weeks ago, and I offered that, we have to decide what we're regulating here, because there's different tools depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you. And I think, Ayesha, you mentioned one of the projects you mentioned, the Ontario one being the one first permitted under their permit process. That was just high level, different process for that type of project than you would permit for an actual mine, is my understanding.
That's exactly right. And I think it's the beginning of what we're going to see, and to Stephen's point, Headley is a great example of this. And what I've seen is it really requires an internal champion. So when you speak to government, as a whole, there sometimes might be some pushback on legislative change or policy change. But if you have one champion who is really keen on trying things differently, that pathway is there. And another example I can give is in Australia. We're actually really excited for this, where we've leveraged a grant from the Australian government, and we have about $500,000 to do a drill program that's in collaboration with the Australian government, who holds the liability for the project, but we're also working with the exploration permit holders. That kind of structure doesn't exist in Canada, but I think there's a lot that different governments can learn from each other about how they're approaching this challenge.
Great, thank you. A very related topic in terms of finding champions and the right people to partner with are, how important your relationships and work are with First Nations and Indigenous groups on these projects. Are you able to share a few more thoughts on that? I know you mentioned for Headley working with Similkameen peoples. Yeah,
happy to, Amy. It's interesting because Ayesha mentioned the fact that, particularly due to the effort to reprocess gold, I think it was in the 80s, Ayesha, that was unsuccessful. The idea of remining, because our assumption is this is the greatest thing since canned beer. Who wouldn't want one of these things in their community, right? Which is, I'm kind of overstating intentionally, but it wasn't immediately attractive to some of the community leaders because of this history. right? And there's also an interesting dynamic where there's tension historically between the provincial government and tribes, and it's true in jurisdictions all over the world, right, around these projects. And so it's kind of interesting because part of the approach, I mean, I think one of our learnings, and it's not like we learned it, we knew it going in, we need sometimes to go pretty slow, right? Take a year to build a relationship before anything really gets put on the table. We've done that in a number of our projects. And so it looks like the early stages of our pipeline development are slower than, than some of your investors might like, or your funders. And so you've got to, it's part of the reasons we started as a private company, right? Is you gotta be willing to, focus on the community piece of this and walk the talk. And so we've built into our model and our runway, Amy, the very strategy. Runway meaning how much time do we have to produce metals and make this profitable. A very intentional community strategy, knowing that patience is essential, building relationships are key, and that sometimes even if a project can be done commercially and technologically, we're going to have to either not do it or wait a bit or walk away from it. And that's just part of the equation, right? So it's hard as a startup, which is what we are, because you're used to okay, let's produce more code over the weekend, and now we can use AI to do that. So it's a different story. But it's a startup I always say we're a startup in a very slow space. And so we have to be cognizant of that reality in our work every day. And we are also of the view that, each of our first projects has to not only tell the story, but be kind of exquisite from a community partnership perspective. And we realize that that's always an evolution. Like it's up and down, and it needs work all the time. So that's kind of our orientation. It's not, no one on this call is going to be surprised by us saying that. I realize that. But I think maybe what's different is we baked it into our startup business strategy, and we've been very careful with our investors and with our partners, I have some downstream partners who want cobalt in their or lithium in their batteries yesterday, right? And so I have to preach patience. So I think that's what's different for us, is just the building it into that business strategy, Amy.
Indeed, timing is very important when it comes to building those relationships. And quite right, it does take time, and it needs to be a genuine effort. So yeah, very good. I think given our time, we'll leave it there for now, and thank our audience very much for joining us today. But also thank you so much to the two of you for sharing such great information for us all. We hope you all enjoyed and were inspired by this look into remining and how it can help shape the future of the industry. Our next PDAC webinar, Unearthing Values, How London Complements Global Mining Financing Strategies, will be taking place tomorrow, Tuesday, from 11 to 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And you can sign up for any of our upcoming sessions through the PDAC events button under the video window, or by visiting the events section of Fasken.com. We hope you can join us for our next session, and thanks once again.